I always thought grief had a shape, a beginning, a middle, an end, something you could hold in your hands and eventually set down when the weight became bearable. But standing in my kitchen that November morning, staring at the empty chair where Duncan used to sit with his coffee and newspaper, I realized grief isn't a thing at all. It's an absence, a space where something vital used to be, now filled with questions that have no answers, and a silence so loud it drowns out everything else. The police had declared him dead exactly 3 months after he vanished. No body, no evidence of foul play, just gone. Like the morning fog that rolls in from the Firth of Forth and swallows everything whole before burning off by noon. Except Duncan never burned off. He never came back. My name is Moira Campbell, and I'm 62 years old. I've lived in this stone house on the edge of Edinburgh for 35 years, every single one of them with Duncan by my side. We raised 3 children here, built a life here, survived loss and celebrated joy within these walls that smell of old wood and sea salt. I thought I knew every corner of this house, every secret it held. I thought I knew my husband even better. I was wrong about both. The morning after the police closed their investigation, I found myself standing in Duncan's study, a room I'd barely entered in the last decade. He'd always called it his sanctuary, and I'd respected that boundary, the way you respect the small privacies that keep a marriage healthy. But he was gone now, and I needed something. Closure, maybe? Or just the comfort of being surrounded by his things. That's when I noticed it. A phone I'd never seen before, tucked behind a row of books about Scottish history. Not his regular Noble. This was older, a cheap burner phone with a cracked screen. My hand shook as I turned it on, not sure what I was looking for or what I feared finding. The battery was nearly dead, but it had enough life to show me one thing: a voice memo recorded the day before he disappeared. I pressed play. Duncan's voice filled the room, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Just hearing him again, it was like being punched and embraced at the same time. Duncan said, "Moira, if you're listening to this, then I was right to be afraid. Trust no one, not even..." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving only static and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I played it again and again. Trust no one, not even... Who? Not even what? The words burrowed into my chest like shards of ice, sharp and unforgiving. What had Duncan been afraid of? And why hadn't he told me? Outside my window, the fog was rolling in, thick and gray, blurring the line between sea and sky. I'd always found it beautiful before, that daily disappearing act. Now it felt ominous, like the world itself was trying to hide something from me. Or maybe like I had been living in fog all along, and I was only just now realizing I couldn't see clearly, couldn't see anything at all. I looked down at the phone in my hands, at that incomplete warning frozen on the screen, and felt something shift inside me, something that had been soft and yielding, hardening into something else entirely. Grief, I was learning, doesn't just hollow you out. Sometimes it fills you with questions. And sometimes those questions demand answers, no matter how much the truth might hurt. How do you mourn a man who left you a warning instead of a goodbye? The days after finding that phone blurred together like watercolors in rain. I went through the motions, making tea I didn't drink, answering calls from concerned neighbors, accepting casseroles I'd never eat. But underneath the numbness, something was stirring, a discomfort I couldn't name. Like wearing someone else's clothes and only slowly realizing they don't fit. My children had always been attentive, but after Duncan's disappearance, their attention turned into something else. Something that felt less like love and more like surveillance. Callum, my eldest at 38, had moved into the guest room within days of his father being declared dead. "Just until you get back on your feet, Mom," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder in a gesture that felt more possessive than comforting. He was a solicitor in the city, always impeccably dressed in suits that cost more than Duncan used to make in a month. He had his father's height, but none of his warmth. My daughter Fiona, 35 and sharp as broken glass, had taken to stopping by every morning with groceries I hadn't asked for. She'd reorganize my kitchen cupboards while asking probing questions about Duncan's finances, his business dealings, his affairs in order. She worked in property development, and she had a way of looking at things, at people, like she was calculating their value. And then there was Jamie, my youngest at 32. Sweet Jamie, who had always been the gentle one, the artist who disappointed Duncan by refusing to pursue something practical. He'd been quieter than the others, but his eyes followed me constantly, like he was waiting for something, watching for something. I told myself I was being paranoid. They were worried. They were grieving too. But Duncan's voice kept echoing in my head. Trust no one. It was Callum who first mentioned the papers. We were sitting in the living room on a gray afternoon, rain streaking the windows like tears the house was crying for me. He pulled a folder from his briefcase with the careful ceremony of someone handling something precious and dangerous at once. Mom, we need to talk about Dad's estate. There are some documents that need your signature. Standard procedure for death certificates, bank accounts, property transfers. I've already reviewed everything. It's all in order. I reached for the folder, but he held it just slightly out of reach, just for a moment, just long enough for me to notice. I can look at them first, can't I? I asked, hearing the edge in my own voice. Of course, he said quickly, sliding the papers across the coffee table. I just mean that it's all very straightforward. Legal formalities, nothing to worry about. But I was worried. I didn't know why yet, but I was. That night, after Callum had finally retreated to the guest room, I sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread before me. Legal language had always given me headaches, all those hereins and whereases that seemed designed to obscure rather than clarify. But I forced myself to read every word. On the surface, it all looked normal. Death certificate processing, bank account access for estate management, property deed clarifications. But something nagged at me. A phrase here, a clause there. Words that seemed to grant my children more control than simple estate management should require. I thought about calling a solicitor of my own, someone outside the family, but wouldn't that be a betrayal? Wouldn't that mean I didn't trust my own children? And wasn't that exactly what Duncan's paranoia was doing to me, turning me into someone who saw shadows and conspiracies where there was only grief and paperwork? I signed nothing that night. I told myself I needed time to think, to clear my head. But really, I was listening to that voice memo playing on repeat in my memory. Trust no one. The fog outside had thickened to the point where I couldn't see the sea anymore, couldn't see anything beyond the garden wall. The house felt smaller somehow, the walls closer, the air heavier. Or maybe I was just finally noticing what had been true all along, that I'd been living in a cage so comfortable, I'd mistaken it for a home. Upstairs, I could hear Callum moving around in the guest room, the floorboards creaking under his weight. And I wondered, not for the first time that week, when exactly had my children stopped feeling like children and started feeling like strangers?
Sleep became something I only pretended to do. I'd lie in the bed Duncan and I had shared for 35 years, listening to the house settle around me, and I'd wonder when everything had started feeling so wrong, or if it had always been wrong and I'd simply been too comfortable, too trusting to notice. The family home had been our pride. Duncan had worked himself nearly to death, oh, the irony of that phrase now, to buy this place when the children were young. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. Stone walls thick enough to hold secrets, windows that looked out over the Firth, rooms filled with memories of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesday evenings that had felt, at the time, like nothing special. Now those rooms felt like they belonged to someone else, or maybe I was the one who didn't belong anymore. Fiona had started talking about practical arrangements with a kind of enthusiasm that made my stomach turn. She'd arrived with estate agent brochures tucked under her arm, glossy pages showing smaller flats in the city, retirement communities with activities coordinators and communal dining rooms. "You don't need all this space anymore, Mum," she'd say, walking through the rooms with an appraising eye that made me feel invisible. And the upkeep must be exhausting. Wouldn't it be lovely to have something more manageable? Let us handle the sale, the logistics. You just rest. Rest. As if I were dying myself, as if being 62 and widowed meant I should quietly fold myself up and become small and convenient for everyone else. Jamie was subtler, but no less insistent. He'd sit with me in the evenings, tea growing cold between us, and talk about new beginnings and letting go of the past. His voice was soft, almost hypnotic. Sometimes I'd catch myself nodding along, agreeing to things I didn't really mean to agree to, and I'd have to shake myself mentally, remind myself to stay sharp. But it was Callum who frightened me most. Not because he was cruel, he wasn't, but because he was methodical. Every conversation felt like a negotiation. Every question had layers I couldn't quite parse. He'd taken over Duncan's study, spread his own papers across the desk where my husband used to work. I'd walked past one evening and seen him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. And when he noticed me, he'd smiled and waved, but his eyes hadn't smiled at all. I started paying attention, really paying attention, to the conversations that stopped when I entered a room, to the looks exchanged between my children when they thought I wasn't watching, to the way they'd steer me away from certain topics, certain questions about Duncan's business, his accounts, his plans. My husband had been a quiet man, steady and reliable. He'd worked as an accountant for a small firm in the city, nothing glamorous, but enough to keep us comfortable, or so I'd thought. But the police had mentioned things during their investigation, questions about accounts I'd never heard of, property holdings I didn't know existed, money that seemed to have appeared and disappeared in patterns that made the investigating officer's eyebrows rise. "Did your husband have any enemies, Mrs. Campbell?" the detective had asked me, and I'd laughed. Actually laughed. Duncan? Sweet, boring Duncan who did crosswords every evening and fell asleep in front of the television? Enemies? But maybe I hadn't known him as well as I thought. Or maybe the real question was, who else hadn't I known? I went back to Duncan's study late one night after Callum had finally gone to sleep. The room still smelled like my husband, old books and the particular brand of soap he'd always used. I sat at his desk, running my hands over the surface, and tried to see what Callum saw when he sat here. What was he looking for? What had Duncan hidden? The desk was old, inherited from Duncan's father. Heavy oak with drawers that stuck and brass handles that had turned green with age. I'd never paid much attention to it before, but now I examined it with new eyes, opening each drawer, feeling along the backs and bottoms for anything unusual. Nothing. Just old receipts, spare pens, a box of business cards from the firm where Duncan had worked for 20 years before retiring. I was about to give up when my hand caught on something underneath the bottom drawer, a slight irregularity in the wood. I pulled the drawer completely out, set it on the floor, and felt carefully along the space where it had been. There. A small envelope taped to the underside of the desk frame. My heart hammered as I peeled it free, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Inside was a key. Just a key, small and silver with no label or marking that indicated what it opened, but there was also a note in Duncan's handwriting, behind the wedding photo, "When you're ready to know." I looked up at the wall above the desk. Our wedding photo hung there, the two of us, young and impossibly hopeful, standing outside the registry office on a rainy October afternoon 35 years ago. I'd looked at that photo 1,000 times. Never once had I thought to look behind it. I'd lifted the frame from the wall, and there, taped to the back, was a small USB drive. The fog outside the window was so thick I couldn't see the garden, couldn't see anything except my own reflection in the glass. A ghost of a woman holding secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to know. But Duncan had left this for me. He wanted me to find it. Wanted me to know what? I looked at the USB drive in my palm, at the key with its unknown lock, and I felt that hardness inside me crystallize into something sharp and clear. Purpose, maybe. Or just the simple, terrifying knowledge that whatever I was about to discover would change everything. What do you do when you realize the life you've been living was only half the story?
I didn't sleep at all that night. Just sat in the darkness of my bedroom with Duncan's USB drive and that mysterious key, turning them over in my hands like they were relics from someone else's life, which, in a way, they were. My laptop was ancient, a dinosaur Duncan had bought me years ago that I mostly used for emails and online shopping. It took forever to boot up, the fan whirring loud enough that I worried Callum would hear it from the guest room. But eventually the desktop appeared, and with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, I inserted the drive. One folder, one video file, created 3 days before Duncan disappeared. I clicked it. Duncan's face filled the screen, and I had to press my hand against my mouth to keep from crying out. He looked terrible, exhausted, frightened, older than I'd ever seen him. He was in his study, the same room where I had found this drive, but the curtains were drawn and only a desk lamp illuminated his face from below, casting shadows that made him look almost skeletal. "Moira," he began, and his voice cracked on my name. "If you're watching this, then I was right to be afraid, and I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry for not telling you sooner, for not being brave enough to say these things to your face. But I need you to know the truth. I need you to understand what's really happening." He paused, rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked back at the camera, his eyes were wet. "The children," he said. "Moira, I know. They're planning something. I've seen the documents, heard the phone calls they think I don't hear. They're going to try to take everything. The house, the accounts, the money I've been setting aside for you. They've been planning it for months, maybe longer. I don't know when they stopped being our children and became this." My chest felt tight, like someone was standing on it. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be Duncan, my rational, level-headed husband, making wild accusations about our own children. But he kept talking. "I've been investigating them, Callum especially. He's been forging documents, Moira. Power of attorney papers, amended wills, property transfer forms, all of them with my signature. Except I never signed them. I never authorized any of it. He's good, he's a solicitor, he knows how to make it look legal. But it's fraud, it's theft. And they're all in on it together." He leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There's money, Moira. More than you know about. I've been careful with it, invested it, hidden it where they can't find it. It was supposed to be for you, for your future. A charity I was setting up in your name for families who've lost everything, who need help rebuilding. I wanted to surprise you with it. I wanted to leave something good behind, something that mattered. But they found out about it somehow, and now they want it for themselves." The video flickered. Duncan looked off camera like he'd heard something. When he turned back, his face was pale. "I don't know how much time I have. If something happens to me, if I disappear or worse, you need to know that it wasn't an accident. The key you found will open a safety deposit box at the Royal Bank on Princess Street, box number 247. Everything you need is in there. Copies of the real documents, evidence of what they've done, instructions for the charity. Get help, Moira. Get a solicitor you can trust, someone outside the family. Don't let them..." The video cut off abruptly. just stopped mid-sentence, leaving me staring at a frozen image of my husband's frightened face. I sat there for a long time, not moving, barely breathing. The darkness outside my window had started to gray with the approaching dawn. Soon the fog would roll in from the sea, covering everything, making the world disappear the way it did every morning. Reliable as clockwork, familiar as my own heartbeat, but nothing was familiar anymore. Nothing was what I thought it was. Duncan hadn't just disappeared. He'd been frightened enough to make this video, to hide evidence, to warn me. And 3 days after recording it, he was gone. The police had found no evidence of foul play, but they hadn't been looking for it. They'd assumed he'd wandered off, maybe confused, maybe suicidal, an aging man who'd simply left. But what if he was right? What if our children, my children, the babies I'd carried and birthed and raised, what if they'd done something to him? No, that was insane. I was being paranoid, letting grief and confusion twist everything into conspiracy. Children didn't murder their parents for money, not in real life, not my children. But Duncan's voice kept echoing in my head. Trust no one. I looked at the key in my palm, box 247 at the Royal Bank. Whatever was in there, Duncan believed it was important enough to hide, to protect, important enough to die for. The house was starting to wake up around me. I could hear water running in the bathroom, Callum probably starting his methodical morning routine. Soon Fiona would arrive with her false cheer and her estate agent brochures. Jamie would send his daily text, checking on me, always checking. I had a choice to make. I could pretend I'd never found the video, never seen Duncan's frightened face telling me truths I didn't want to hear. I could sign the papers, sell the house, move into some small flat where my children could keep an eye on me. I could be a good mother, a trusting widow, a woman who knew her place. Or I could go to the bank. I could open that safety deposit box and look at whatever evidence Duncan had left behind. I could stop being a victim and start being, what? A detective? An avenger? Simply a woman who refused to disappear as quietly as her husband had. The fog was rolling in now, thick and white, erasing the garden, the sea, the whole world behind my window. But I wasn't in the fog anymore. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could see clearly. How do you choose between your children and the truth?
The Royal Bank of Scotland on Princes Street had always intimidated me. All that stone and glass, those stern-faced tellers behind their counters, the hushed atmosphere that made you feel like you should whisper even when asking about your balance. Duncan had handled our finances the way couples of our generation often divided things. He managed the money, I managed the home. Simple, traditional. And now I could see how that division had left me vulnerable. I waited until Callum left for his office before I dressed carefully in my best coat, the one Duncan had bought me for our last anniversary. I needed to look respectable, competent, not like a grief-addled widow chasing ghosts and conspiracies. The key felt heavy in my pocket as I took the bus into the city. I could have asked Callum to drive me or called a taxi, but I needed this to be invisible, private. The last thing Duncan had wanted me to have, and I wasn't about to share it with anyone until I understood what I was dealing with. Edinburgh was beautiful that morning, the kind of crisp autumn day that makes the castle on its hill look like something from a fairy tale. Tourists crowded the Royal Mile, taking photographs and eating mediocre shortbread. Life going on as normal, as if nothing had changed, as if my entire world hadn't turned upside down.
The bank manager who helped me was a young woman named Elsa with kind eyes and a Glasgow accent. She examined the key, checked my identification, and asked me to wait while she verified the box number. I sat in one of those uncomfortable chairs banks always have, my hands folded in my lap, trying to look calm while my heart tried to beat its way out of my chest. "Mrs. Campbell," Elsa returned with a smile, "everything checks out. If you'll follow me." The safety deposit room was in the basement, all fluorescent lights and sterile efficiency. Box 247 was small, unassuming. Elsa opened it with her key and mine, then left me alone in a private viewing room with instructions to ring the bell when I was finished. For a long moment, I just stared at the metal box on the table in front of me. Whatever was inside could change everything. Or it could be nothing. Paranoid ramblings from a man who'd been more disturbed than I'd realized. Maybe Duncan had been sick, confused, imagining threats that didn't exist. But I thought of his face in that video, the fear in his eyes. That wasn't confusion. That was knowledge. Terrible, specific knowledge. I opened the box. Documents. Stacks of them, neatly organized with colored tabs and Duncan's careful annotations. I spread them across the table, my hands steadier now, and began to read. Bank statements from accounts I'd never known existed, property deeds for investments Duncan had never mentioned, insurance policies, stock certificates, bonds. We weren't wealthy, not like rich people in magazines, but we were comfortable in a way I hadn't understood. Duncan had been very, very careful with money over the years, and he'd built something substantial. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the other documents, the forged ones, side by side with the originals, so I could see the differences. A will that left everything to the children, not to me. Power of attorney papers that gave Callum control over everything if Duncan was declared incompetent or missing. Property transfer documents that would move the house into Fiona's name. Investment liquidation forms that would allow Jamie to access Duncan's carefully hidden accounts. Every single one with Duncan's signature, except according to the expert analysis Duncan had commissioned, dated just 2 weeks before he disappeared, every single signature was fake. Close, remarkably close, but fake. My children had been forging legal documents, planning to take everything, and Duncan knew it. There was a letter, too, sealed in an envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I opened it, as I saw Duncan's familiar handwriting one more time. It began, "My darling Moira," and I had to stop, had to breathe, had to remind myself that crying in a bank safety deposit room wasn't going to help anything. I don't know how to tell you this, so I'll just say it plainly. Our children are not who we thought they were. I don't know when they changed or if they were always this way and we were too blind to see it, but they've been planning this for at least a year. Callum is the mastermind. He has the legal knowledge, the connections. Fiona handles the property side, the valuation, the sales strategy. Jamie, sweet Jamie, who we always worried about, he's been helping them launder money through his art sales, making illegal transfers look legitimate. I've tried to confront them, but they deny everything. They look at me like I'm crazy, like I'm the problem. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe this is all some paranoid delusion, and if it is, I'm sorry for putting you through this, but Moira, I need you to trust me one more time. I need you to believe that I'm right about this, even though everything in you will want to believe in them instead. There's more money than what's documented here. I've been setting up a charitable foundation in your name, the Moira Campbell Trust for Families in Crisis. It's registered, it's legal, and it's worth nearly £500,000. The paperwork is with my solicitor, Graham McAllister, at McAllister & Sons on George Street. He's a good man, someone you can trust. The foundation was supposed to be my surprise for your birthday, but now I need it to be your protection. They can't touch it. By law, it's yours and yours alone. If I'm gone, if something's happened to me, please don't grieve for too long. Use that money to help others, to do good in the world. And please, Moira, save yourself. Don't let them take everything I worked for, everything I wanted you to have. You're stronger than you think. You always have been. I just hope I've been brave enough to show you how strong. All my love, always. Duncan. I sat there in that small, sterile room surrounded by documents that proved my children were thieves and possibly worse, and I felt something break open inside me. Not grief this time, something sharper. Anger, maybe? Or just the cold, clear understanding that I'd been a fool. I'd raised them, fed them, clothed them, loved them, sat up with them when they were sick, celebrated their successes, mourned their failures. I'd been their mother, their champion, their constant source of unconditional love. And they'd repaid me by planning to rob me blind. By possibly, oh God, I couldn't even think it, by possibly doing something to their own father. No, I couldn't go there yet. Not without proof, not without being certain. I gathered all the documents carefully, put them back in the box, and rang for Elsa. My mind was already working, planning, thinking through next steps with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I'd like to keep this box active, and I'd like to add a provision that only I can access it, no one else, under any circumstances. Is that possible? Of course, Mrs. Campbell. We can set that up right now. When I left the bank, the fog had burned off and the sun was shining on Princes Street. The castle looked solid and eternal, like it had stood there forever and would stand there forevermore. But I knew better now. Nothing was eternal. Nothing was what it seemed. I took out my mobile phone. Duncan had insisted I get one a few years ago, though I'd never been comfortable with it, and called the number on the business card I'd taken from the safety deposit box. McAllister & Sons, how may I help you? I'd like to make an appointment with Graham McAllister. My name is Moira Campbell. I believe he's been handling some affairs for my late husband. There was a pause. Then, of course, Mrs. Campbell. Mr. McAllister has been hoping to hear from you. How is tomorrow morning at 10? Tomorrow morning at 10 is perfect. Nothing about this was perfect. Everything was broken and terrible and wrong, but I was done being passive, done being the victim. Duncan had left me a weapon, the truth, and I was going to use it.
If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next chapter of life, love, and redemption.
I spent that evening being the perfect mother. I smiled when Fiona stopped by with dinner she'd picked up from the expensive organic place she loved. I nodded along as Callum explained more paperwork I needed to review. I hugged Jamie when he told me he'd been worrying about me, that I looked tired, that I should rest more. The whole time, I watched them. Really watched them, looking for signs I'd missed before. And now that I knew what to look for, I saw everything. The way Callum's eyes flicked to Duncan's study when he thought I wasn't looking. The two casual questions Fiona asked about Duncan's business associates, his solicitor, his affairs. The way Jamie touched things in the house, the mantelpiece, the wall, the doorframe, like he was already calculating how much it would all be worth. They thought I was fragile. They thought grief had made me weak, pliable, easy to manipulate. And I'd let them think that because it had been easier than facing the truth. Easier than admitting that my own children had been planning to betray me. But I wasn't fragile anymore. Or maybe I was, but I'd learned that fragile things could also be sharp. Glass breaks, but it cuts on the way down. "Mom," Callum said as he was leaving that night, his hand on my arm in that possessive way he had, "those papers I gave you earlier this week, have you had a chance to look them over?" "Not yet," I lied smoothly. "It's all so overwhelming, darling. So much legal language." "Of course," he said, but I saw the flash of impatience in his eyes. "But we really do need to get them filed soon. For tax purposes, for the estate. It's important, Mum. Dad would have wanted everything handled properly." Dad would have wanted you not to forge his signature, I thought, but I smiled and nodded and promised I'd look at them soon. Very soon. After they all left, I sat in the living room with the lights off, looking out at the fog-shrouded garden. The house was so quiet. Without Duncan, without children I could trust, it felt like a mausoleum. A beautiful, expensive tomb for a life that had died months ago. But I wasn't dead. Not yet. Graham McAllister's office was in the new town, one of those Georgian buildings with high ceilings and original moldings that made you feel like you were stepping back in time. He was in his 60s, white-haired and kind-faced, and when he saw me, his expression softened with genuine sympathy. "Mrs. Campbell, I'm so very sorry about Duncan. He was a good man, one of the best clients I've ever had, and I don't say that lightly." "Thank you," I said. "I found your card in the safety deposit box." His eyes sharpened with understanding. "Ah, so you know, then, about the foundation, about everything." "I know enough, but I need to know more. I need to understand exactly what Duncan set up, what my rights are, what my children can and can't do legally." We talked for 2 hours. Graham showed me documents, explained trusts and foundations and legal protections in language I could actually understand. The picture that emerged was both comforting and terrifying. Duncan had protected me. The Moira Campbell Trust was ironclad, structured so that only I could access it. Only I could direct how the money was used. It was separate from the estate, beyond the reach of any will or inheritance claim. Even if I'd signed every forged document my children had created, they couldn't touch the foundation. But the house, the other accounts, everything else, that was vulnerable. If I wasn't careful, if I didn't fight back, they could take it all. Legally, with their forged documents and their careful planning, they could leave me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a charity I didn't know how to run. "What did Duncan tell you?" I asked Graham. "About the children, about why he was doing all this?" Graham was quiet for a moment, weighing his words carefully. "He said he discovered some concerning financial activities. He didn't give me specifics, said he was still investigating, but he was frightened, Mrs. Campbell. In all the years I knew him, I'd never seen him frightened. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure you got to the truth." "And did anything happen to him? Or did he just leave?" "That," Graham said, "is a question I've been asking myself for 3 months. The police concluded he'd wandered off, possibly disoriented or confused. But Duncan wasn't confused. He was one of the sharpest men I've ever met. And he was planning for the future, the foundation, the protections he put in place for you. Those aren't the actions of a man planning to disappear." He leaned forward, his expression grave. "Mrs. Campbell, I'm not a detective, but if you're asking my opinion as someone who knew your husband well, I don't think he left voluntarily. I think something happened to him, and I think you need to be very, very careful." The fog was thick when I left Graham's office, rolling through the streets like something alive. I walked slowly, thinking, planning. Duncan had given me tools, evidence, money, legal protections, but he couldn't give me courage. I had to find that myself. My phone buzzed. A text from Callum. "Mom, we need to talk about the house. Fiona has an interested buyer. Can we meet tomorrow?" An interested buyer. They weren't even waiting anymore. They weren't even pretending to let me grieve. I typed back, "Of course, darling, tomorrow afternoon." But I wasn't going to be the woman they expected. I wasn't going to be the quiet, grieving widow who signed whatever they put in front of her. I was going to be the woman Duncan believed I could be, the one who was strong enough to fight back. I just needed a plan and proof, real, undeniable proof of what they'd done. The fog swirled around me as I walked, and for the first time, I didn't find it beautiful. I found it appropriate, because everything in my life was fog now. Unclear, uncertain, dangerous. But fog always burns off eventually, and when it did, I would be ready. How do you gather evidence against people who've been planning this for years? The answer came from the most unlikely source. Duncan's old business partner, Malcolm Fraser. I'd forgotten about Malcolm, honestly. He and Duncan had worked together at the accounting firm before Duncan retired, and they'd been friendly, if not exactly friends. But when I called the firm asking if anyone knew about Duncan's recent activities, Malcolm's name came up. He'd retired the same year as Duncan, and according to the receptionist, he'd been asking questions after Duncan disappeared. I met Malcolm at a small cafe near the Water of Leith, away from the city center and the eyes of anyone who might know me. He was smaller than I remembered, frailer, with that translucent quality very old people sometimes get. But his eyes were sharp, and when he saw me, they filled with something that looked like relief. "Mrs. Campbell," he said, taking my hands in his. "Thank God. I'd hoped you'd reach out. I've been worried sick." We sat by the window, tea growing cold between us, and Malcolm told me things that made the pieces finally click into place. "Duncan came to me about 6 months before he disappeared," Malcolm began. "He was troubled, said he'd noticed some irregularities in his personal accounts, money moving in ways he didn't authorize. Small amounts at first, then larger. He thought maybe he'd made mistakes, that retirement had made him rusty with the numbers. But when we looked closer," Malcolm shook his head. "It was sophisticated, Mrs. Campbell, very sophisticated. Someone with legal knowledge and access to his accounts had been siphoning money for months, maybe longer, setting up shell companies, moving funds through them, making it look legitimate. Duncan traced it back to Callum, his own son. I wasn't surprised, not anymore. But hearing it stated so plainly by someone outside the family made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Callum confronted him," Malcolm continued, "quietly, privately, gave him a chance to explain, to make it right. And do you know what Callum said?" Malcolm's voice dropped. "He said Duncan was senile, that he was imagining things, getting confused in his old age. He suggested very gently that maybe Duncan needed to see a doctor, maybe needed to step back and let his family handle things for him." The tea churned in my stomach. And Duncan was furious. But more than that, he was hurt. You could see it in him, Mrs. Campbell. The realization that his own son thought so little of him would gaslight him like that. He started investigating deeper, and that's when he found evidence that Fiona and Jamie were involved too. The that they've been planning this together for at least a year. Why didn't he go to the police? Malcolm looked at me sadly. Because they're his children, your children. He kept hoping he was wrong, that there was some explanation, and he was terrified of what it would do to you if it all came out. He wanted to protect you from it, handle it quietly, maybe find a way to fix them before it went too far. But it did go too far, I said quietly. Yes, Malcolm agreed. I think it did. Duncan was getting close to having enough evidence to bring to the authorities. He told me he was going to give the children one more chance to come clean, to return what they'd taken, and then he disappeared. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, the water of Leith flowed past, dark and cold and indifferent. Mr. Fraser, I said, do you think my children killed my husband? He met my eyes steadily. I think your husband was about to expose them. I think he had evidence that could have sent Callum to prison, ruined Fiona's business reputation, destroyed Jamie's life. And I think people have done terrible things for far less reason than that.
But you have no proof. No, he admitted. Neither did Duncan, not of that. Just suspicions, terrible suspicions. I thought about the voice memo. Trust no one. Not even who? Not even his own children? Or had he been about to say something else? Something I needed to know? Will you help me? I asked Malcolm. Will you help me find proof? Not just of the fraud, but of what happened to Duncan. He smiled, and suddenly he looked less frail, less old. Mrs. Campbell, I've been waiting 3 months for you to ask me that question. Duncan was my friend. He deserves justice. And so do you. We made a plan. Malcolm had copies of some of Duncan's financial investigations, documents he'd kept when they'd worked together. I had the evidence from the safety deposit box. Between us, we had enough to prove the fraud, to show the forgeries. But to prove something more sinister, to prove what had really happened to Duncan. We need to make them nervous, Malcolm said. People make mistakes when they're nervous. They get sloppy, say things they shouldn't. We need to let them know you're not the easy target they think you are. That afternoon, I called a family meeting. All 3 children came, of course. They couldn't stay away, couldn't risk me doing something without their knowledge. We gathered in the living room, the same room where I'd signed those first innocent documents months ago, and I saw their eyes light up when I brought out the folder Callum had given me. I've been thinking, I said slowly, playing the part of the uncertain widow they expected, about the papers, about selling the house, about all the changes you've been suggesting. They leaned forward, eager, practically salivating. And I've decided, I continued, my voice growing stronger, that I want to understand everything before I sign anything. So I've hired a solicitor, Graham McAllister. Some of you may know him. He was your father's solicitor as well. The change in the room was instant. Fiona's smile froze. Jamie went pale. But it was Callum's reaction that told me everything I needed to know. His face went blank, carefully neutral, and his hands clenched into fists before he forced them to relax. "Mum," he said carefully, "that's not necessary. I'm a solicitor. I can handle—" "I know, darling," I interrupted. "But Graham knew your father well. I'd like his perspective on what Duncan would have wanted. You understand, don't you?" "Of course," Callum said, but his voice was tight. "Of course we understand. We just want what's best for you." "I know you do," I lied. And Mr. McAllister mentioned something interesting. Apparently, Duncan set up a foundation in my name. Did any of you know about that? The silence was deafening. 3 faces, blank with surprise or guilt or maybe fear. 3 of my children. Strangers, wearing familiar faces. "A foundation?" Fiona said faintly. "Dad never mentioned." "No," I agreed. "He didn't mention it to me either. It was meant to be a surprise. But Mr. McAllister has all the paperwork and we'll be reviewing everything together. Isn't that wonderful? Your father's last gift to me." I smiled at them, bright and innocent, and watched them try to smile back. But I could see the wheels turning, the panic setting in, the foundation they couldn't touch, the solicitor who knew the truth, their mother who was suddenly asking questions instead of signing documents. They left shortly after, making excuses about prior commitments. Callum packed his things and moved back to his own flat, claiming he'd imposed on me long enough. Fiona stopped bringing her agent brochures. Jamie's daily texts became less frequent. I'd made them nervous. Now I just had to wait and see what they'd do next. That night, I stood at my bedroom window and looked out at the fog-shrouded garden. Duncan was out there somewhere, in the dark, in the mystery. Maybe gone forever. Maybe just bones in the earth. But his voice was still with me. His warning, his love, his belief that I was strong enough to face this. I touched the cold glass and whispered, "I'm going to find out what happened to you. I promise." The fog swirled, offering no answers. But I didn't need the fog to answer anymore. I needed my children to. How long do you wait before fear turns into mistakes?
The mistake came 2 weeks later, and it came from Jamie. Sweet Jamie, the gentle artist, the one I'd least suspected. But Malcolm had taught me something valuable. The quiet ones are often the ones carrying the biggest secrets. He showed up at the house on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced. I was in the kitchen making soup, Duncan's recipe, the one he'd always made when one of the children was sick. And for a moment, when I saw Jamie at the door, I remembered him as a little boy with a fever, curled up on the sofa while his father spooned broth into his mouth. Then I remembered the forged documents, the shell companies, the money he'd helped launder through his art sales. "Mum," he said, and his voice was shaking, "we need to talk. Just you and me." I let him in, made him tea, sat across from him at the kitchen table and waited. Malcolm had taught me something valuable. The quiet ones are often the ones carrying the biggest secrets. "I need to tell you something," he began. "Something about Dad, about what happened." My heart stopped. "What about Dad?" "The night he disappeared," Jamie said, his hands wrapped around the teacup like he needed its warmth. "He'd called a family meeting, just as kids, not you. He said he had something important to discuss, that it was time for some truths to come out." "What kind of truths?" Jamie looked at me, and there were tears in his eyes. "He knew, Mum, about the money, about what we'd been doing. He had evidence, documents, everything. He said he'd been to the police, that they were opening an investigation. He gave us one chance to make it right, to return what we'd taken and turn ourselves in." "And?" My voice was steady, but inside I was screaming. Callum told him he was being ridiculous, that there was no evidence because we hadn't done anything wrong, that Dad was old and confused and needed help. And Dad, he looked at us, and I've never seen him look like that before, like we were strangers, like we'd broken something in him that couldn't be fixed. Jamie's hands were shaking so badly tea slopped over the rim of his cup. He left, just walked out of Callum's flat, said he was going to the police in the morning, that he'd given us our chance. We tried to follow him, but he got in his car and drove off. It was foggy that night, remember? So foggy you could barely see the road. "Did you follow him?" I asked quietly. "Callum did," Jamie whispered. "He said he just wanted to talk to Dad, make him see reason. Fiona and I waited at the flat. And then Callum came back hours later, and he said Dad was gone, that he'd followed him to the coast, to that road along the Firth, and Dad had stopped the car and gotten out and walked toward the water. Callum said he called after him, but Dad didn't turn around, just kept walking until the fog swallowed him up." "And you believed that?" I asked. "You believed your father just walked into the sea?" "I didn't know what to believe," Jamie said, and now he was crying openly. I wanted to believe it, because if I didn't believe it, that meant Callum might have. He couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I understood perfectly. Did Callum ever admit to anything? Did he ever say what really happened? No, never.
He said we'd all seen Dad that night, that he was clearly disturbed, suicidal. When we went to the police, that's what we told them, that Dad had been depressed, acting strange, talking about being a burden. We lied, Mom. We all lied. Why? I asked, though I need the answer. Why lie if you truly believed he'd walked into the sea?
Jamie looked up at me, his face wet with tears and guilt. Because if the police started investigating, they'd find everything else. All the fraud, all the forgery. We'd go to prison. Our lives would be over. Callum said it was too late anyway, that Dad was gone and nothing could bring him back. That the kindest thing we could do for you was keep you out of it. Let you believe he'd just left. Kind? I repeated flatly. You thought stealing from me was kind? We were going to take care of you, Jamie said desperately. We were going to make sure you were comfortable, that you had everything you needed. We weren't trying to hurt you, Mom. We were scared and stupid. And by the time I realized how wrong it all was, it was too late to stop it. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the garden where Duncan used to plant roses every spring. My hands were clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. Where is he? I asked quietly. If Callum did something to him, where would he have put him? I don't know, Jamie whispered. I swear I don't know. Callum never said, and I was too afraid to ask, too afraid of what the answer might be. I turned to face my youngest child, this boy I'd carried for 9 months, birthed in pain, raised with love, this stranger who'd helped cover up what might have been his father's murder. You're going to tell this to the police, I said, every word of it, and you're going to accept whatever consequences come from that. Mom, or I will tell them myself, I continued, my voice hard as stone, along with showing them every piece of evidence your father gathered, every forged document, every fraudulent transaction. And I will watch you go to prison without feeling one moment of regret. Jamie stared at me, and I saw the moment he realized I meant it, that the mother he thought he knew, the gentle woman who'd always protected him, was gone. Or maybe she'd never existed. Maybe I'd always been capable of this hardness, and we'd all just been pretending otherwise. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. Good, I said. Mr. McAllister will arrange it. And Jamie, if you run, if you warn Callum or Fiona, if you try to disappear, I will find you. I will use every penny of Duncan's foundation to hunt you down, and I will make sure you pay for what you've done. Do you understand me? He nodded, looking at me like someone he'd never seen before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe this was the first time any of my children had seen their mother as anything other than a soft place to land, a source of unconditional forgiveness. But unconditional love has its limits, and they'd found mine. After Jamie left, escorted by Malcolm, who'd been waiting in his car outside just in case, I sat in Duncan's study and cried. Not gentle tears of grief, but harsh, angry sobs that came from somewhere deep and furious inside me. My children, my babies. What had I done wrong? How had I raised them to be people capable of this? Or had I done nothing wrong at all? Maybe they'd always been this way and I'd been too blind to see it, too devoted to the idea of perfect children to notice the reality of flawed, greedy, dangerous people. The fog was rolling in again outside the window. It would be dark soon. The police would come tomorrow, after Jamie gave a statement. They'd open a new investigation into Duncan's disappearance. They might even find his body, if Callum had been foolish enough to leave evidence. But even if they found nothing, even if Duncan was truly gone beyond recovery, I'd done what he asked. I'd found the truth. I'd protected myself. I'd been strong. I just wished being strong didn't hurt so much. What do you do with the love you still feel for people who've betrayed you completely?
The investigation moved faster than I'd expected. Once Jamie started talking to the police, once they saw the evidence Duncan and Malcolm had gathered, everything unraveled with the terrible inevitability of a building that's been burning from the inside. Callum was arrested first. They found evidence on his computer, deleted files he'd thought were gone forever, but which forensic experts recovered. Emails between him and Fiona discussing the Duncan problem, text messages to Jamie about moving money, hiding assets, and most damning of all, GPS data from his phone that showed he'd been on that coastal road the night Duncan disappeared for 3 hours longer than he'd claimed. Fiona followed 2 days later. She'd been preparing to flee. They found plane tickets to Dubai, a country with no extradition treaty. In her safe at home, they found copies of the forged documents, annotated with notes in her handwriting about property valuations and potential buyers. She'd been planning every detail, preparing for the day when I'd sign away everything and she could sell it all. But Jamie had already told the truth, and so their careful planning meant nothing. It was just evidence of their crimes, preserved in their own handwriting. The search for Duncan's body took 3 weeks. They focused on the area where Callum's phone had been that night, a stretch of coastline near Cramond, where the Firth meets the sea and the fog rolls in thick and white. It's beautiful there, peaceful, a place Duncan and I had walked many times when we were young and still believed life would be kind to us. They found him in the water, his body caught in rocks near the shore. He'd been there all along, just beyond sight, waiting. The pathologist couldn't determine exact cause of death. Too much time had passed, too much damage from the water and the elements. But there were signs consistent with blunt force trauma, signs of a struggle. Callum maintained he'd done nothing, that Duncan had been distraught and had attacked him when he tried to stop him from walking into the sea, that he'd fallen and hit his head on the rocks, and Callum had panicked and left him there, that it was an accident, a tragic misunderstanding. But the forensic evidence told a different story. And so did Callum's own texts, recovered from his deleted files. Messages to Fiona sent in the hours after Duncan died. It's done. He won't be a problem anymore. The trial was a nightmare. Months of testimony, of watching my children sit in the dock and lie, even as the evidence mounted against them. Callum was charged with murder, Fiona with conspiracy and fraud, Jamie with accessory after the fact and financial crimes. I testified, told the court about the voice memo, the safety deposit box, the foundation Duncan had created to protect me. I showed them the forged documents, explained how my children had planned to steal everything. I watched the jury's faces as they realized the full scope of what had happened, and I saw the moment they stopped seeing a grieving family and started seeing what it really was, a conspiracy to commit murder for money. Callum was convicted. Manslaughter, not murder. The jury believed there was reasonable doubt about premeditation, but it was enough. 20 years. Fiona got 12 for conspiracy. Jamie, who'd cooperated and shown genuine remorse, got 6. My children, in prison, for killing their father and trying to rob their mother. I sat in the courtroom gallery as the sentences were read, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, no anger, just a terrible emptiness where love used to be. Afterward, Graham McAllister drove me home. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? Justice had been served, but it felt less like victory, more like everyone had lost. "What will you do now?" Graham asked as we pulled up to my house. I looked at the stone walls, the windows reflecting the afternoon light, the garden where Duncan's roses had grown wild and untended. This house that had held so much life, so much hope, so much betrayal. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Keep going, I suppose. What else is there?" But I did know, really. Duncan had left me the foundation for a reason, not just to protect me, but to give me purpose, a way to turn pain into something useful, something good. The Moira Campbell Trust for Families in Crisis. Families torn apart by violence, by crime, by betrayal. Families who needed help rebuilding, finding solid ground again. I understood that now, in a way I never could have before. I'd been torn apart. I'd had to rebuild. And if I could use Duncan's gift to help others do the same, then maybe his death wouldn't be entirely meaningless. Maybe none of this would be. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights off, looking out at the fog rolling in from the sea. It was beautiful again, I realized. Not ominous, not threatening, just nature doing what it always did, hiding things for a while, then revealing them when the time was right. Duncan was buried now, properly, with a headstone and flowers and all the dignity he'd been denied when his body lay hidden in the water. I visited his grave every week, told him about the foundation, about the families we were helping, about how I was learning to live with the fact that our children had become monsters, but that maybe that didn't make our love for them or the good moments we'd shared any less real. Love is complicated. It doesn't end just because it should. It doesn't stop hurting just because the people who hurt you are locked away. But it changes. It has to. And so do we.
It's been 2 years now since the trial ended. 2 years of learning to live in a house that feels too big and too empty, of running a foundation I never expected to have, of becoming someone I never thought I'd need to be. The fog still rolls in every morning, regular as breathing. I've learned to find peace in it, in the way it obscures everything and then lifts, leaving the world clear and sharp and somehow new. That's what grief is, I think. A fog that comes and goes, that changes what you can see, that makes you appreciate clarity when it finally arrives. Jamie writes to me sometimes from prison, letters full of apology and regret, and the kind of self-reflection that only comes when you've lost everything and have nothing but time to think about why. I read them, but I don't always respond. Some wounds need time to heal, and I'm not sure 2 years is enough. Maybe 20 won't be enough. Maybe we'll both get old and die with this brokenness between us, never quite resolved. Fiona doesn't write. I heard through Graham that she's become a model prisoner, teaching literacy classes to other inmates, working in the library, creating a new identity for herself, one that isn't built on greed and betrayal. I hope it's real. I hope she finds some kind of peace, but I don't need to be part of that journey. Callum, I try not to think about. The son who killed his father, the one who looked me in the eye and lied over and over without flinching. There's a hardness in him that frightens me, a capacity for violence I never knew existed. Maybe it was always there. Maybe Duncan and I just refused to see it. The foundation thrives. We've helped 87 families in 2 years, families escaping domestic violence, families recovering from fraud, families torn apart by crime and working to put themselves back together. Every single one of them reminds me why I'm still here, still fighting. Because if Duncan's death could lead to this, to real help for real people, then maybe it wasn't entirely in vain. I've learned things about myself these past 2 years, that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can survive betrayal and loss and grief that should have destroyed me, that love and hate aren't opposites. They're companions walking hand in hand through your life, impossible to separate completely. I've learned that families are complicated, that the people you'd die for can be the same people who'd steal from you, lie to you, hurt you beyond measure, and that you can acknowledge that truth while still holding on to the good memories, the real moments of love that existed before everything fell apart. Most importantly, I've learned that redemption isn't about forgiveness. It's not about letting go or moving on or any of those easy phrases people offer when they don't know what else to say. Redemption is about taking the broken pieces of your life and building something new from them, something that matters, something that helps. Duncan's roses are blooming again. I hired a gardener who taught me how to prune them properly, how to feed them, how to coax beauty out of tangles. It's harder than it looks. Roses are delicate but resilient, soft but protected by thorns. They need careful attention, but they don't need to be coddled. I think maybe I'm like those roses now. Still soft in some ways, still capable of beauty, but thorned, protected, harder to hurt than I used to be. Today, I'm 64 years old. I live alone in a house by the sea, running a foundation my dead husband created to protect me, and doing work that actually matters. My children are in prison for crimes they committed against me and their father. Most people would look at my life and see tragedy. But when I look in the mirror these days, I don't see a victim. I don't see someone destroyed by betrayal. I see a woman who survived, who fought back, who took the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into something good. The fog is rolling in again outside my window. I can hear the sea beyond it, constant and eternal. Somewhere in that water, Duncan's body once lay hidden. Now he's buried properly, at rest, his secrets revealed and his warnings heeded. I miss him. Not the man I thought he was, but the man he actually was. Flawed and frightened and brave enough to leave me the truth, even though it shattered everything. I'm grateful to him too. For the foundation, yes. For the evidence that protected me. But mostly for believing I was strong enough to handle the truth, even when I didn't believe it myself. Because he was right. I am strong enough. We all are, when we have to be. The question isn't whether we can survive betrayal and loss. The question is what we choose to do with that survival. How we transform pain into purpose. How we honor the people we've lost by becoming the people they believed we could be. And the answer, I've learned, is simply this. We keep going. We wake up each morning, we face the fog, we wait for it to lift, and we do the work that needs doing. We help who we can help, we love who we can love, we protect what needs protecting, and we survive. Not perfectly, not without scars, but we survive. And sometimes, on the good days, that's enough.
If this story touched your heart and you'd like to support this work, consider buying me a coffee on Ko-fi. Every small gesture helps bring more stories like this one to life. Thank you for listening, and remember, your kindness makes stories possible.